Collapse of the Reich. By the spring of 1945, the German army was in full retreat. Cities lay in ruins, fuel was gone, and ammunition dwindled. Soldiers surrendered in the tens of thousands, their officers unable to maintain discipline. For many, the war was no longer about victory, but about survival. American forces advancing across the Rhine found themselves overwhelmed with prisoners. Entire divisions marched into captivity, hands raised. Civilians begged GIs to take in their sons and husbands, fearful of Soviet vengeance. Within weeks, the US Army held millions of prisoners of war, far more than it could house in temporary camps along the Rhine. The solution was bold: ship them across the Atlantic to the United States itself. America's decision. The US military faced an unprecedented logistical challenge. By May 1945, it had custody of more than 3 million German POWs. The temporary barbed wire cages along the Rhine, called the Rheinwiesenlager, Rhine meadow camps, were overcrowded and unsanitary. The British, too, struggled to contain their share. American commanders realized that only by dispersing prisoners far from the battlefield could they manage them effectively. They also saw opportunity. The United States, with its vast interior, had labor shortages. On farms, in lumber yards, and in factories, POWs could legally be put to work under the Geneva Convention. So the decision was made. Hundreds of thousands of Germans would be shipped to the US mainland. It was an extraordinary reversal of fortunes. Soldiers who once marched into Paris and Warsaw would now pick cotton in Texas or harvest wheat in Kansas. Boarding the Liberty ships, the journey began at European ports like Le Havre in France or Southampton in England. Prisoners, herded under guard, were marched onto Liberty ships and troop transports. Vessels that had once carried GIs eastward now carried TARs, their enemies westward. For the Germans, the voyage was filled with dread. Nazi propaganda had long painted the United States as a land of gangsters, racial chaos, and capitalist exploitation. Some feared they would be executed at sea. Others whispered they would be sent to hard labor in mines until they died. Instead, they found American guards firm but fair. The men were issued rations, given space on deck when weather permitted, and sometimes even allowed to sing. The food, canned meat, bread, coffee, was often more than they had seen in months. For soldiers who had been starving on the front, the irony was bitter. Their enemy fed them better in defeat than their own Reich had in the final months of war. The Atlantic crossing. The voyage across the Atlantic was long, often lasting 2 weeks. Ships sailed in convoys, zigzagging to avoid U-boat attack, though by 1945 German submarines were a spent force. Life aboard was monotonous. Prisoners slept in hammocks or on decks, crammed together in stuffy holds. Seasickness was common. Guards kept close watch, though escapes at sea were impossible. The prisoners talked endlessly. What awaited them in America? Would they ever see home again? One POW later recalled, "We imagined America as a land of skyscrapers, jazz, and cowboys. Some thought we would be treated as slaves. Others said we would be shot. The truth was, we did not know. The ocean was a wall between our past and an uncertain future." Landfall. First glimpses of America. For many, the first sight of America came at dawn as the Statue of Liberty appeared through morning mist. Ships entered New York Harbor, where the skyline rose in gleaming towers untouched by war. For men whose last memory of cities was bombed-out Cologne or Hamburg, the contrast was staggering. Others landed at Newport News, Virginia, or Boston, where bustling ports teemed with cranes, freighters, and warships. Everywhere the Germans saw abundance. Docks piled with goods, endless trains, trucks rolling along highways, harbors crowded with ships. For men raised on the myth of American decadence, the reality was shocking. Here was a nation untouched by devastation, brimming with industry, wealth, and confidence. The train ride inward after disembarking, prisoners were loaded onto trains bound for camps scattered across the American interior. The journeys sometimes lasted days, crossing landscapes unlike anything the Germans had imagined. They saw vast fields of corn and wheat, forests stretching for miles, rivers broad and powerful, and towns unscarred by bombs. They were astonished by the sheer size of America. One POW wrote in his diary, "We traveled for 3 days, and still we were in America. The land seemed endless. Farms had machines we had never seen. Even barns were larger than houses in Germany." The trains themselves were a marvel, clean, efficient, well supplied. Guards distributed sandwiches, fruit, even cigarettes. Compared to their hunger on the front lines, it was a strange reversal. Prisoners were treated with more care than they had expected. Arrival at the camps. By mid-1945, more than 400 POW camps operated across the United States, with branch camps in nearly every state. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and the Midwest hosted the largest numbers, but camps existed as far away as California, Arizona, and New England. Most were former army bases ringed with barbed wire and guard towers. Conditions varied, but compared to Europe, they were orderly, clean, and well supplied. Prisoners were issued uniforms marked POW, given bunks, blankets, and meals. The Geneva Convention required humane treatment, and American authorities, aware of the need to set an example for their own POWs in German hands, generally complied. First impressions, the shock was immediate. German POWs, expecting brutality, instead found themselves fed 3 times a day. They received medical care, could send letters home and e-vows, and buy small luxuries at camp canteens. But what struck them most was not the treatment inside camps, but the world outside. Whenever they glimpsed America, farms, towns, factories, they were astonished by its prosperity. Here was a nation at war, yet its shelves were full, its cities intact, its people confident. For Germans raised under propaganda that depicted America as weak, corrupt, and decadent, the truth was undeniable. America was strong because it was wealthy, and wealthy because it was industrial beyond imagination. A clash of worlds. For many POWs, captivity in America was their first real exposure to the United States. They had known it only through caricatures, Hollywood movies, Nazi speeches, and wartime rumors. Now they lived inside it. They saw farmers driving tractors larger than anything in Europe. They saw railroads with endless freight cars. They saw towns with stores overflowing with goods. They ate meals that seemed extravagant compared to Germany's starvation. The realization was profound. America's power came not from ideology, but from industry, abundance, and organization. The emotional impact. This realization was not easy. Many POWs felt humiliation. They had fought for a Reich that promised domination, only to find themselves prisoners in a land richer and stronger than their own. Others felt envy, admiration, even longing. One former soldier wrote years later, "We thought Germany was the center of the world. In America we saw that we had been deceived. Their wealth was overwhelming. Their strength was not lies. It was reality." This emotional impact would shape their memories for decades. The beginning of a transformation. Thus, by the time German POWs settled into camps across the US, their worldview was already shifting. The journey itself, the ships, the ports, the trains, the glimpses of cities and farms, had shattered illusions. They were prisoners, yes, but they were also witnesses. Witnesses to the greatest industrial machine the world had ever known. Witnesses to the America that had defeated them not only with bombs and bullets, but with factories, farms, and wealth beyond imagining. Closing of Part 1. The story of German POWs in America begins not in barbed wire camps, but in the shock of arrival. The realization that the enemy they had been told was decadent was in fact a colossus of industry and abundance. From surrender on the battlefield to the voyage across the Atlantic to the first sight of America's ports and plains, the journey was a revelation. And it was only the beginning. In the chapters that follow, the prisoners' daily lives, labor, and lasting memories would deepen that revelation. For in captivity, they would not only survive, they would witness firsthand the industrial might of the nation that had defeated them. Ports of plenty. When German POW ships arrived on the American coast, the first impression was overwhelming. At Newport News, Norfolk, and Boston, prisoners saw harbors packed with vessels, liberty ships, tankers, aircraft carriers, and endless freighters unloading cargo. Cranes swung ceaselessly, unloading grain, coal, machinery, and military vehicles. For men who had last seen the bombed-out ports of Hamburg or Bremen, silent, ruined, and lifeless, the sight was staggering. America's ports pulsed with activity, evidence of a nation whose industrial power had not only survived war, but flourished under it. One POW later recalled, "We thought Germany was a land of engineers, but in America everything was bigger, ships, cranes, warehouses. The port itself was a factory, and it never stopped." The train ride across America. After disembarking, prisoners were loaded onto trains. For many, this was the most eye-opening experience of their captivity. German railways in 1945 were shattered. Bridges lay collapsed, tracks twisted, locomotives destroyed by Allied bombing. In contrast, American trains were sleek, powerful, and seemingly endless. As POW trains rolled westward, the Germans stared in astonishment at the landscape. Endless farmland dotted with tractors larger than any they had seen. Rows of silos and barns, each bigger than entire village squares back home. Highways filled with trucks and cars, even in wartime. Factories with smoking chimneys, operating day and night. It was not just the scale, but the abundance. Germany in 1945 starved. America in 1945 overflowed. Shock at the size of the country. The sheer vastness of the United States was another revelation. Many Germans had never travelled far beyond Europe. In America, they crossed plains that stretched to the horizon, forests that lasted for hours, rivers broader than anything in Germany. Days passed and sint, ill they were in the same country. One soldier wrote, "We thought Germany was a great nation, but in America you ride for 3 days and still you are in America. Their land is endless, their resources without limit. It is no wonder they defeated us." This realization weighed heavily. Germany had waged war against a nation not only wealthy, but vast beyond comprehension. Arrival at the camps. By mid-1945, German POWs were dispersed across more than 400 main camps and thousands of smaller branch camps in the United States. States like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and Georgia hosted the largest populations, but camps stretched from Maine to California. The camps varied in size and quality, but all were bound by the Geneva Convention. Prisoners were housed in barracks, issued clothing marked PW, and given food, medical care, and basic supplies. Compared to the devastation in Germany, conditions were surprisingly humane. Many prisoners gained weight, recovered from wounds, or received dental care for the first time in years. Food, abundance beyond belief. Perhaps nothing shocked the Germans more than American food. Meals included bread, meat, vegetables, fruit, and even coffee. Rations were plain but generous. For men accustomed to watery soup and stale crusts, the contrast was astonishing. Prisoners joked that they were fed better as captives than as soldiers. Some later admitted they had never eaten so well in their lives. One diary entry reads, "In Germany, we fought over a potato. In America, the guards gave us oranges." This abundance symbolized America's wealth. Food was everywhere, even during total war. Work programs. Soon after arrival, many POWs were put to work. Under international law, they could not be forced into dangerous labor, but they could be assigned to non-military tasks. Thousands worked on farms, harvesting wheat, cotton and corn. Others worked in sawmills, canneries or road maintenance. Their wages were small, but they could buy items in camp canteens, cigarettes, soap, even chocolate. What shocked them most was the machinery. American farms had tractors, combines and mechanical harvesters. German agriculture still relied heavily on horses and manual labor. Seeing one farmer with machines do the work of dozens of men left POWs speechless. One recalled, "We understood then why America had such wealth. Their machines worked while their men went to war. Germany had soldiers, but America had machines." Encounters with civilians. Many POWs worked outside camps under guard, bringing them into contact with American civilians. Farmers often treated them with wary respect. Some families gave them extra food or coffee. Children were curious, staring at the enemy soldiers who seemed ordinary, even friendly. Over time, barriers softened. POWs were astonished to find Americans generous, not vengeful. Some even formed friendships that lasted years after the war. This too was a shock. Propaganda had told them Americans were brutal. Instead, they found a people confident enough in victory to show mercy. Culture shock. Beyond food and machinery, POWs encountered a cultural shock that lingered long after. They saw stores overflowing with goods, even during wartime rationing. They read newspapers filled with debate, unlike censored German propaganda. They watched movies in camp theaters, marveling at Hollywood's glamour. They heard jazz and swing music, rhythms banned in Nazi Germany. For many, America seemed not only wealthier but freer, more vibrant, more modern. The psychological impact, this confrontation with reality, left deep marks. Some prisoners felt envy and despair. They realized Germany could never match America's industrial power. Others felt admiration, even longing. Some became quietly pro-American, shaping future sympathies in post-war Germany. One POW wrote years later, "In America we saw the future. In Germany we had fought for the past." The shock mattered. The POW's shock at America's industrial might was not trivial. It influenced how they remembered the war, how they explained Germany's defeat, and how they viewed the United States in the decades that followed. For many, the war's lesson was simple. Germany lost not because its soldiers lacked courage, but because its enemy had resources on a scale unimaginable. America's factories, farms, and wealth had been decisive. By the end of their first months in America, German POWs had begun to grasp the true scope of US power. From the bustling ports to the endless plains, from the food on their plates to the machines in the fields, they saw a nation not weakened by war, but strengthened by it. The shock was profound. Their image of America as decadent had been shattered. Instead, they found themselves captives in the heart of the greatest industrial power on earth. And as they worked, observed, and lived among Americans, their admiration and their envy would only deepen. According to the 1929 Geneva Convention, prisoners of war could not be forced into combat-related or dangerous labor, but they could be required to perform non-military work. The United States, eager to uphold international law, saw labor as a way to manage its massive POW population. By 1945, more than 425,000 German prisoners were scattered across America in hundreds of camps. Housing and feeding them required resources, and labor offered a solution. POWs could fill wartime shortages on farms, in factories, and in public works. For the Germans, this work became their window into America's industrial might. The first assignments, soon after arriving, many POWs were transported to branch camps, smaller facilities near farms or industrial sites. Each morning, trucks or buses carried them to work details under guard. They built fences, harvested crops, cut timber, or canned food. At first, most were wary. They feared harsh treatment or humiliation, but what they encountered was often the opposite. American employers grateful for help, farmers who offered food, and workplaces filled with machinery that left the prisoners stunned. Shock at American agriculture. Nothing shocked the POWs more than America's farms. In Germany, agriculture still relied heavily on horses, hand tools, and family labor. But in America, POWs saw tractors, combines, threshers, and irrigation systems. One farmer with machines could harvest what in Germany required dozens of men. A prisoner in Nebraska recalled, "We were 5 men with scythes to cut wheat at home. In America, one farmer with a machine did the work of 50. Others marveled at silos, barns, and irrigation canals. Some compared barns in Kansas to the size of entire German villages. The abundance was staggering." The scale of food production. German POWs also witnessed America's food production at scale. They worked in canneries where conveyor belts packed vegetables by the ton, or in orchards where machines shook fruit from trees. In Germany, food had become scarce by 1942. By 1945, civilians starved. In America, food was not only plentiful, but mass-produced with efficiency. Even in captivity, Germans were better fed than their families back home. One diary entry reads, "In America, the cows eat better than we did as soldiers." Sawmills and lumber yards. Other POWs worked in sawmills or lumber yards. Here they saw giant mechanical saws slicing logs with ease. Forklifts moved timber in bulk. For Germans accustomed to manual labor in forests, the mechanization was astonishing. One POW wrote, "In Germany we cut by hand. In America the machines sang louder than the forest. It was not men, but iron that did the work." Factories and industry. Though most POWs were kept out of sensitive war industries, some worked in auxiliary roles near factories, cleaning, packaging, or handling non-military goods. Even glimpses of US factories shocked them. Assembly lines moved ceaselessly. Machines stamped, welded, and produced in quantities unimaginable to Germans used to smaller workshops. The speed, organization, and abundance of resources impressed even the most skeptical. One later admitted, "We realized then that the war had been lost not in battlefields, but in factories. America could produce more tanks, more planes, more of everything. We could never match it." Encounters with American farmers. Daily contact with American farmers deepened the shock. Farmers often treated POWs with civility, sometimes even generosity. They gave extra coffee, shared sandwiches, or allowed breaks in the shade. Some prisoners, astonished, asked why farmers were so kind. The answer was often simple: labor was labor, and the war was far away. These encounters humanized America for the Germans. They had been told Americans were corrupt and cruel. Instead, they found them industrious, pragmatic, and confident. Stories of admiration. Many POWs later spoke of moments when admiration overcame resentment. In Texas, prisoners picking cotton saw giant mechanical harvesters. One muttered, "No wonder they beat us. Even their fields march like armies." In Iowa, a POW marveled at a dairy farm where machines milked dozens of cows at once. He later confessed, "I thought America was lazy, but their machines worked harder than men." In Georgia, men working in canneries saw endless rows of canned peaches. One wrote, "At home we had hunger. In America, fruit was locked in cans, waiting to be eaten." Such experiences left indelible marks. The humiliation of comparison. For some Germans, the shock was humiliating. They had believed in Hitler's claim that Germany was the master of modern industry. Instead, they discovered Germany was backward compared to America's mechanization. A former officer confessed, "We were told we fought for the most advanced nation, but in America, even a farmer's barn was more modern than our factories." This humiliation forced reflection. Many realized that Germany had gambled on war against a nation whose industrial superiority made victory impossible. Prisoner letters. Although censored, some prisoners managed to convey their impressions in letters home. Families in ruined Germany received hints. We eat well. America has more than pardon. Enough. Machines here do what men do in Germany. If Germany had what I see here, the war would be different. For German civilians scraping by in ruins, such words were almost unbelievable. Yet they confirmed rumors. America was not only strong, but inexhaustibly wealthy. Camp canteens and goods. Inside camps, prisoners could buy items with their small wages. Canteens stocked cigarettes, soap, candy, even magazines. For Germans accustomed to shortages, this abundance was another shock. Some POWs treasured American cigarettes or chocolate, hoarding them as proof of America's prosperity. Years later, veterans still recalled the taste of Hershey bars as symbols of captivity and abundance. Music and movies. Cultural exposure deepened the impression. Camps often showed movies, Hollywood productions filled with glamour, modernity, and abundance. German soldiers, who had been fed Nazi propaganda, were astonished by the energy of American films. Music, too, left an impact. Swing and jazz, banned in Nazi Germany, played on camp radios. For some, it was the first taste of a freer, more dynamic culture. One POW later recalled, "We were prisoners, yet we danced in secret to American jazz. It was forbidden in Germany, but in America it was joy." Building admiration for democracy. The abundance, the fairness of treatment, and the exposure to free press slowly eroded Nazi indoctrination. Some camps ran re-education programs, showing prisoners films about democracy and the horrors of Nazism. Combined with their daily encounters with American wealth, many POWs began to admire US society. One prisoner summarized, "We lost the war because America had more tanks, but we admired America because it had more freedom." The seeds of future change, for many Germans, captivity in America planted seeds that would later shape post-war West Germany. When they returned home, they carried memories of abundance, industry, and democracy. Some became advocates for cooperation with the West, recognizing that Germany's future lay not in domination but in rebuilding along American lines. Eyewitness accounts. Friedrich Lenz, POW in Kansas. I drove a tractor for a farmer. It was larger than any machine I had seen. He let me ride it alone. I thought, this machine is why Germany cannot win. Josef Kruger, POW in Texas. We picked cotton by hand while the farmer used a machine. He finished his rows before we finished ours. I realized then we were not the stronger nation. Ernst Vogel, POW in Iowa. The barns were clean, the silos full, the fields endless. In Germany we fought for bread. In America, bread grew everywhere. These voices illustrate the awe, humiliation, and admiration that defined their experience. Closing of Part 3. By the end of their first year in America, German POWs had learned more about their captor than propaganda had ever allowed. They had seen America's farms, factories, and culture up close. They had worked with its machines, eaten its food, and witnessed its abundance. The shock was permanent. The war had been lost not just in battle, but in industry. America's might was not myth, it was reality, visible in every tractor, every can of peaches, every cigarette in a camp canteen. And as they prepared to return to Germany after 1946, they carried with them not just memories of captivity, but an indelible impression. America's strength came not from fear, but from industry, democracy, and abundance. Captivity as a new life. When German POWs finally settled into their American camps, many realized they were entering a strange kind of second life. They were prisoners, yes, stripped of weapons, ranks, and uniforms, but they were also, in many ways, safer and better fed than they had been for years. Their days were structured by military discipline, but compared to the chaos of retreat and bombardment in Germany, captivity in the United States felt orderly, almost surreal. For the first time in months, they could sleep without fear of artillery, eat meals without scavenging, and look forward to tomorrow with the knowledge they would likely survive. Rules and daily routine. Each camp operated under a clear routine. Prisoners woke early, stood for roll call and ate breakfast, usually bread, jam, sometimes eggs or cereal. Work details departed soon after. Farm crews, forestry teams or maintenance units. Those not assigned to labor performed chores within the camp. Lunch and dinner were communal, eaten in mess halls or outdoor kitchens. Even the simplest meals astonished Germans. Meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread with butter. Coffee was common, sometimes cocoa. At night, after evening roll call, prisoners returned to their barracks. Guards patrolled, but the atmosphere was rarely brutal. Unlike Nazi camps, American POW facilities operated under international law, and prisoners noticed the difference. Recreation and education. Many camps offered recreation. Soccer fields and volleyball courts were built. Orchestras and theatre groups formed among the prisoners. Music drifted over barbed wire, sometimes American jazz, sometimes German folk tunes. Education became a tool of transformation. Some camps hosted classes in English, mathematics, or engineering. Universities even collaborated with camps to provide structured courses. For German youth who had grown up under Nazi Scouts, this was their first exposure to democratic-style education. Re-education programs also showed films on democracy, American history, and Nazi crimes. Some POWs resisted, dismissing them as propaganda. Others were quietly persuaded. Combined with daily life in America, these programs reshaped many attitudes. Exposure to American culture. Perhaps most profound was POW exposure to American culture. Movies. Camps screened Hollywood films, comedies, dramas, musicals. Prisoners saw abundance on screen. Glamorous actors, stylish clothes, carefree crowds. For men from bombed-out cities, these films were windows into another world. Music. Radios played jazz and swing, rhythms banned in Germany as degenerate. Many POWs fell in love with the music, associating it with freedom and joy. Newspapers. Camp libraries stocked American papers. POWs marveled at open political debate, editorials criticizing leaders, something unimaginable under Nazi rule. One POW later recalled, "For us, the most shocking thing was not their machines, but their freedom. They argued in papers, laughed at their leaders, and still the nation was strong." Encounters with guards and civilians. Interactions with American guards also shaped impressions. Most guards treated prisoners firmly but fairly. Some were friendly, even conversational. GIs who spoke German often exchanged stories, sometimes about their own families. Work details outside camps brought POWs into contact with civilians. Farmers relied on them, and many treated prisoners with kindness. Children were curious, sometimes offering apples or gum. Such encounters humanized the enemy. For POWs raised on propaganda portraying Americans as brutal, the reality was disorienting. They found not cruelty, but confidence and pragmatism. Letters home. Prisoners were allowed to write letters, though censored. Families in ruined Germany received notes filled with hints. "We are fed well. Do not worry for me. America is large, richer than I imagined. I am alive, and one day I will tell you of what I have seen. Captivity as a new life." When German POWs finally settled into their American camps, many realized they were entering a strange kind of second life. They were prisoners, yes, stripped of weapons, ranks, and uniforms, but they were also, in many ways, safer and better fed than they had been for years. Their days were structured by military discipline, But compared to the chaos of retreat and bombardment in Germany, captivity in the United States felt orderly, almost surreal. For the first time in months, they could sleep without fear of artillery, eat meals without scavenging, and look forward to tomorrow with the knowledge they would likely survive. Rules and daily routine. Each camp operated under a clear routine. Prisoners woke early, stood for roll call and ate breakfast, usually bread, jam, sometimes eggs or cereal. Work details departed soon after. Farm crews, forestry teams or maintenance units. Those not assigned to labour performed chores within the camp. Lunch and dinner were communal, eaten in mess halls or outdoor kitchens. Even the simplest meals astonished Germans. Meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread with butter. Coffee was common, sometimes cocoa. At night, after evening roll call, prisoners returned to their barracks. Guards patrolled, but the atmosphere was rarely brutal. Unlike Nazi camps, American POW facilities operated under international law, and prisoners noticed the difference. Recreation and education. Many camps offered recreation. Soccer fields and volleyball courts were built. Orchestras and theatre groups formed among the prisoners. Music drifted over barbed wire, sometimes American jazz, sometimes German folk tunes. Education became a tool of transformation. Some camps hosted classes in English, mathematics, or engineering. Universities even collaborated with camps to provide structured courses. For German youth who had grown up under Nazi Schooling, this was their first exposure to democratic-style education. Re-education programs also showed films on democracy, American history, and Nazi crimes. Some POWs resisted, dismissing them as propaganda. Others were quietly persuaded. Combined with daily life in America, these programs reshaped many attitudes. Exposure to American culture. Perhaps most profound was POW exposure to American culture. Movies. Camps screened Hollywood films, comedies, dramas, musicals. Prisoners saw abundance on screen. Glamorous actors, stylish clothes, carefree crowds. For men from bombed-out cities, these films were windows into another world. Music. Radios played jazz and swing, rhythms banned in Germany as degenerate. Many POWs fell in love with the music, associating it with freedom and joy. Newspapers. Camp libraries stocked American papers. POWs marveled at open political debate, editorials criticizing leaders, something unimaginable under Nazi rule. One POW later recalled, "For us, the most shocking thing was not their machines, but their freedom. They argued in papers, laughed at their leaders, and still the nation was strong." Encounters with guards and civilians. Interactions with American guards also shaped impressions. Most guards treated prisoners firmly but fairly. Some were friendly, even conversational. GIs who spoke German often exchanged stories, sometimes about their own families. Work details outside camps brought POWs into contact with civilians. Farmers relied on them, and many treated prisoners with kindness. Children were curious, sometimes offering apples or gum. Such encounters humanized the enemy. For POWs raised on propaganda portraying Americans as brutal, the reality was disorienting. They found not cruelty, but confidence and pragmatism. Letters home. Prisoners were allowed to write letters, though censored. Families in ruined Germany received notes filled with hints. "We are fed well. Do not worry for me." "America is large, richer than I imagined." "I am alive, and one day I will tell you of what I have seen." Influence on post-war Germany. These experiences shaped post-war attitudes. Returning POWs often became advocates for cooperation with the West. They had seen firsthand the strength and prosperity of America. In West Germany, admiration for US industry and democracy grew. Many veterans quietly spread stories of what they had seen: machines that replaced men, markets full of goods, newspapers filled with debate. This influenced how West Germans embraced Reconstruction, aligning with the US during the Cold War. In East Germany, Soviet-returned POWs told harsher stories of gulags, starvation, and forced labor. The contrast between American and Soviet captivity deepened the divide of Germany itself. The long-term legacy, the legacy of POW captivity in America, endured long after the war. For many Germans, their years behind American barbed wire were paradoxically their first exposure to freedom, abundance, and modernity. They carried these memories into the rebuilding of West Germany. The economic miracle of the 1950s owed something to this admiration for American methods. As one historian noted, Germany's future was shaped not only by defeat, but by the lessons its prisoners learned in American fields and factories. Eyewitness Reflections, Carl Hoffman, POW in Oklahoma. I milked cows with machines I had never seen. When I came home, I told my village, America is the future. Germany must learn or perish again. Wilhelm Schneider, POW in Arkansas. We watched movies of cowboys and cities with lights brighter than day. It was not propaganda. It was real. When I came home, I dreamed of those lights. Friedrich Bauer, POW in Minnesota. We were prisoners, yet we learned. We saw abundance, fairness, and freedom. It broke our pride, but it gave us new hope. Closing reflection. The story of German POWs in America is not only about captivity. It is about revelation. They arrived as defeated enemies, frightened and humiliated. They left as witnesses to the might of a nation whose power came not from ideology, but from industry, democracy, and abundance. For many, the memory lasted a lifetime. America had been their captor, but also their teacher. In fields of corn, in barns larger than houses, in movies and music, they saw a vision of modernity that changed them forever. When they returned to a ruined Germany, they carried that vision with them. And in doing so, they helped shape a post-war world in which West Germany looked westward, not east, for its future.